hearing the choir and seeing the silhouettes of people we love and being reminded of how we are all connected in that circle, whether we see one another or not, is something we need to take with us today. This morning we will look beyond the shared readings of the common lectionary to writings of the Apostle Paul, who is writing to a diverse, conflicted, and somewhat chaotic church that's in cosmopolitan Corinth in the ancient world. Let us hear from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak with the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And now, faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. Well, it's Valentine's Day. It seems fitting to hear once again from 1 Corinthians 13, Apostle Paul's famous love prose. Most of us have heard these words before, probably a lot, maybe at a wedding, right? Or maybe we've seen it on a poster or cross-stitched or needle-pointed at Grandma's house, hanging on the wall. Deborah and I first read these words when we were really young. And being so in love with each other, we thought the Apostle Paul must be describing the love that we felt, and at least the love we hoped that would live between us. And the good news is we're still in love all these years later, and we're still learning to live such a love. It's a lifelong process. She puts up with a lot. Fact is, though, the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, isn't writing instructions for lovers here, though it is great advice, worth looking at once in a while. Paul is actually teaching on what's most important in being the church, on being followers of Jesus' life and teachings. Loving is still today how we ourselves can be the church. Paul wrote the maybe all too familiar words of 1 Corinthians 13, knowing that his readers in ancient Corinth really needed a makeover on how to be a church. Their church community, if you read through all of the letters and do a little research, that church community was not loving well at all. There were lots of egos and privilege and one-upsmanship and all of that stuff going on constantly. So Paul wrote to them describing how divine love acts. Love is a verb, but in our English, especially in America, it's a confusing word because it's also a noun and it gets tossed around a lot. Like in our 21st century world, we see something good or something we like or something that's funny, and we say, "Oh, I love that." But in the next sentence, we say, "I love you, sweetheart." Way different meanings. Same four letters. In Greek, the language of the New Testament, though, it's much more specific when it says the word love. They have different words for different types of love. Some of you know this, but the word, depending on its subject, the word for love might be, in Greek, philia, which is a kind of friendship love. Or, I'm not sure about the Facebook friendship, but that's another thing. The Greeks had a word for parental love, storge. It's the kind of parental affection a mom or dad shows when they care for their child. It just comes out of the middle of them. And then there's the Greek word eros. They even had a goddess named that for the kind of romantic love celebrated like on Valentine's Day. And in our modern era, people are still seeking that kind of love, and these days it's all the more challenging. People have to even go on the web because you can't meet face-to-face very well and all of that. But the word that Paul is talking about is completely different. When he writes to the church in Corinth, he's using the word for love, agape, loving action. Love that's sourced in the divine. Love that is willing and sacrificial and unconditional and self-giving. His famous words lay out the details of that divine love in action. It turns our attention from having feelings to taking an action for someone else's good. Divine-powered love does not come pre-programmed in we human beings. We have to tap into that divine source of love. And though we may instinctually feel the storge love for a child, most of the time anyway, and we may naturally build friendship love, and we may emotionally and biologically even have that eros love blended with friendship, which makes Valentine's love, we may instinctually have those things, but we need a divine source for unconditional love, self-giving love, agape love. Jesus lived this divine agape love in the way he treated people. That's why it's so important to read about the life of Jesus, because story after story shows him reaching across all the boundaries and showing love in action. He showed compassion for the outcast, for the poor, reached out to the diseased, to the failures. The divine love he had didn't depend on lovability or even likability. Humans may feel natural caring for a hungry child or a lost animal or people like us, but it's supernatural to reach out with caring action like Jesus did to that crabby, fault-finding coworker we might have, or to the unpopular kid at school, or to that beggar holding the cardboard sign at the expressway exit. And what's wonderful is many of you show that supernatural caring. And I happen to be, and so does Pastor Valerie, happen to be in a place where we sometimes catch glimpses of this, people doing these things, not knowing that other people are noticing necessarily. One example, there's one mountain riser named Lauren who, despite the pandemic, every week spends a day making sandwich lunches to go for the food insecure, struggling people on the streets downtown at the Salem Soup Kitchen. That's divine love, agape love in action. And I could go on and on, but thank you, Lauren, for reminding us what that kind of love looks like. I can see faces of people, even here in worship, on the other side of the glass, and could count off loving things they have all done, showing that divine love. In our peace reading today, Jesus tells his most committed followers, people he called friends, said, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Jesus wasn't talking about beliefs. He wasn't talking about feelings. He was telling them how to act. Writer Susan Cottrell says, quote, "Before religion made it all about what we believe, Jesus was all about how we love." End quote. And we, how do we love? Well, we are to love like that letter Paul wrote to the church in Corinth. We love by being patient and kind and humble and not resentful. Even now, even though COVID-19 keeps us socially distanced from one another, or when we are close to each other, we have to wear a mask so we can't see our facial expressions, we can still love practically. Love one another, Jesus said. Like, for instance, most of us have one of these cell phones, right? Or maybe a landline. Either way, we could use that to put love in action. We could think of someone we used to see at Mountain Rise in worship on Sunday mornings, and we could call them up, check in on them, see how they're doing, see if they might need anything, or if they just need to talk. Love in action. And the U.S. mail still works. Really. This week, Deborah and I got a really nice note from another person showing love in action. Marilyn jotted us a note, lifted our spirits. Yeah, we live in anxious times, and the gray skies don't help much. But these are times when we know that big change must happen. Change must turn the tide toward God's spirit love, the good God intends, toward peace, toward justice, toward a sustainable earth, toward all people recognizing themselves in one another. And it's easy to get discouraged. But we, all of us, together can turn that tide by loving. I believe that's the key. Enabling that divine agape love to let it flow through us. Henri Nouwen, the Dutch theologian, wrote that, quote, "In a world so torn apart by rivalry, anger, and hatred, we have the privileged vocation to be living signs of a love that can bridge all divisions and heal all wounds." Boy, there are plenty of divisions and wounds to go around. It doesn't take much time watching the news before we discover that. There's racial injustice and political polarization and a plague on our hands and nature in crisis. And we must trust that love in action can bridge and heal, as Nouwen says. But it only works if we work it. Got to put it into action. Love is an action word. We who are comfortable, we have to step up and love by reaching out to those who are oppressed. To love by calling out the oppressor. That's a little scary, but it's something we have to do out of love. We can't be passive. We have to tell leaders that we expect justice and that we are watching. We have to show those who are struggling that we are with them and that we're going to do something loving to care for them. Mountain Rise is a church that has so many ways to get involved, to do those kinds of things. You see photos of these ways during our offering time each Sunday, so look for that in a few minutes. Everything from caring ministries to connecting with members, serving and advocating. Got a whole committee just for doing that. Even worship and learning, they are acts of love. So pick some ways to do love in action. And let's get busy. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. love. It's bigger than Valentine's Day. Thank God. Amen.
Amen.